Well, good morning. Hey, I'm so glad to be back with you. If you don't know me yet, my name is Josh. I'm the pastor here at Church on the Drive. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad if you're participating online, you're doing it that way too. We're so glad to be together. Hey, I am just getting back from Guatemala. You can tell by my tan and my beard. I don't normally have either. I forgot to wear sunscreen one day. I got kind of burned. Just don't want to shave on trips. But we had a great time. It was a lot of fun. I got to take 31 people from Edgewater High School with me. That's a lot of fun. Thank you. Hey, so many of you supported that and made that possible. Thank you for giving and making that happen. It was huge, man, because you get out there and you start doing a lot of fun. It is fun, but it's real ministry work. It's real service to others. And sometimes you got to go 3 hours away on a plane ride to be able to know how to do that, right? We look around and we look past people all the time in Orlando, and the hope is that we see something happening in Guatemala and we bring it back to us and we go to Orlando and we go, hey, I see the same stuff here that I can help now. Right, so what we do, we built a house, and sometimes we build stoves. We put on a sports camp, did stuff like that. It was a lot of work, a lot of walking. If I ever see another set of stairs, I might fall over before I get there. You know what I'm saying? One of those things, but it's such a blast. And hanging out with all these families and going into their homes and bringing them food, doing stuff like that, bringing shoes and putting those shoes on their feet. It was incredible. But something I noticed in every single one of those families I was around is something that I noticed every time I go to another country and I see families interacting and doing things. This is something that's true. Just absolutely a truism everywhere you go, whether it's Orlando, Florida, or Guatemala City, Guatemala, or if it's in Israel or Kenya or China, wherever you go, this is something true. Grandparents are suckers. And those of you who are grandparents, you know what I'm talking about. You're all suckers because you let your grandkids get away with more things than you would ever have let your own kids get away with. Yes? Okay. I'm not making this up. I'm watching these Guatemalan kids run around, and their grandmas and grandpas are just like, yeah, whatever. Meanwhile, their parents are chasing after them, right? They're like, hey, come on, you can't do that. And you can just see it happening. It's so funny, the universality of grandparents being suckers, man. So my dad's parents, we called them Ma and Pa, because we're from Texas, and that's the type of things we do there, right? So Ma and Pa, we go to their house, and every day during the summer, we would be there. Every day. Now, I don't drink soda anymore. I haven't since I was 14 years old. And the reason is because I probably drank my lifetime allotment between the ages of 7 and 14 at Ma and Pa's house. All right? I can specifically remember a day when I was like 11, and I drank 14 sodas in one day. I know. Impressive, yeah? And they wondered why I couldn't sleep at night, you know? And I alternated between three main sodas, Barks root beer. Maybe you remember that old classic Surge. Remember Surge? Yeah, I think people died from that one. And then there was Big Red. Anybody here ever had Big Red? Oh, yeah. Yeah, the true soda aficionados amongst us. That's really only in Texas a lot of times. But those three, man, I'd alternate between all of them, and I'm just going nuts everywhere. And my grandma and grandpa never batted an eye. They're just, here you go. You want another soda? There you go. You want to eat 2 cheeseburgers and then go to Taco Bell for lunch? Absolutely. You only had 5 of those potato cake things from McDonald's this morning. You need more food. Oh, man. And grandmas, man. My grandma would stuff me full. Would stuff me full. And even when I didn't want to eat, she'd just sit there and nag me until I ate some more. Grandparents are the best. One time I got her to take me to my first PG-13 movie. Oh, yeah. I got it. She didn't know it was PG-13. I didn't know it was PG-13. I just knew that I probably wasn't supposed to watch it. You know what I'm saying? But all my friends were watching. I was 9 years old, and Ace Ventura had come out. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen Ace Ventura, but it's not appropriate for a 9-year-old boy. It's a fairly raunchy comedy with a lot of things that 9-year-old boys maybe aren't equipped to navigate, especially with their grandmother sitting right next to them in a theater. We were both squirming in that chair, man. We're just like, oh, this is weird. But some parts are funny, right? And you would quote them, but I couldn't even focus on that because my grandma was sitting there. I'm just, yeah, we were both uncomfortable. Well, today I want to talk a little bit about something that might make you uncomfortable, something that tends to make people uncomfortable. This is a little bit of a PG-13 Sunday, so congratulations. If you have children in here and you want to get out, or if you're watching online, you're like, oh, I didn't know this was PG-13, feel free to turn it off, come back later. For the rest of us, it might make you a little bit uncomfortable because we're going to be talking about adultery today. We're going to talk about what all goes on with that. I'm not showing slides or anything, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah. The thing is, talking about these kind of topics in church can either make us really uncomfortable or a little bit happy because we're going to be judgmental. Right? That's the two reactions that tend to come up when we talk about this in church. Often we don't say a word about it, do we? We often don't say a word about it, and we just assume that everybody believes the same thing we do about adultery and all things like that, because this is church, and obviously this is how you're supposed to act. This is how you're supposed to believe. This is what you're supposed to think. And because we don't mention it, we just let people's imaginations run. They start coming up with their own ideas about stuff, and we go, so I'd like us just for a little while today to talk about this commandment about adultery. And I don't want you to fall into the trap of either side of these normal reactions that people have when you talk about adultery in church, right? I don't want you to get super judgmental at all, and I don't want you to get super uncomfortable at all either. Instead, what I suggest is that we look beyond the simple do's and don'ts of social mores and things we've been taught, and let's look instead to what the first Christians believed about this and who they got it from. Jesus, and what he had to say about it. In order to do that, though, I think that we have to look at what was standing in the background for Jesus and his followers when Jesus came on the scene. What was brewing back there in that context, right? So for them, here's what they all knew. You shall not commit adultery. Right, this is from what we often refer to as the Ten Commandments. Now, if you don't know much about the Ten Commandments, here's what you really need to know and remember. The Ten Commandments were given by God to Israel, the people of Israel, right after he had brought them out of slavery in Egypt. And the point was, hey, these are 10 commandments, 10 things, 10 laws that are going to make you different from the people around you. You are my holy, chosen, set-apart people. I want you to be my people. So here's what it looks like if you're going to be my people. You're going to be different. And in these 10 ways, you're going to be different. They had other laws. They had other things. They kind of all stemmed from these 10. But these 10 things made you look different as a people. Isn't it interesting that one of the 10 rules that he puts out there is you shall not commit adultery? And that's, by the way, the only line that comes with it. You shall not commit adultery. You're going to be different. You're going to reflect who I am by not committing adultery. Interesting. Because when we think about adultery, most of us are against that sort of thing, especially the married people, right? Most of us are against that sort of thing. In fact, 90% of Americans in recent polls have said, yeah, this is morally wrong. I'm wondering about the other 10%. I don't know what's going on with them. But most people have always believed that adultery was wrong. Now, when we talk about adultery, what we mean is someone who is sleeping with somebody who's not their spouse. But that's not exactly what the people of Israel thought about adultery. And instead, what they had in mind when they were thinking about adultery was generally a woman who was sleeping with somebody who was not her husband. Now, this could be a married woman or a betrothed woman, somebody who had somebody they were going to be marrying in a year. Either way, if somebody committed adultery, it was a capital offense. They were to be put to death for this offense. It was a big deal. It was a big deal in Israel. And for two main reasons. Two things you need to know and you need to understand about the people of Israel and how they saw marriage and sexuality. Here's the first thing. Marriage was a picture of God's relationship with Israel. For them, they said, look, my covenanted marriage with this person that says I'm going to be with them no matter what, through thick and thin, rich or for poor, all those words, it's a picture of God's faithfulness to the people of Israel. It's a picture of God's faithfulness to us as a people. Now imagine, you're God's holy, chosen, set-apart people. One of the ways that you can testify to that fact is everybody in your society is part of a marriage that says, we are as faithful to each other as God is to our people. So it becomes a religious thing. They really, truly, honestly believed this, that their marriage was basically a testimony of what God had done for Israel and what God was continuing to do for Israel. And if you go look throughout the scriptures, you go look in what we call the Old Testament, or you might call the Hebrew Bible, you go look throughout that. Go read the prophets. Go read the Psalms. Go read the Proverbs. Go read even the law. Go read just the first 5 books of the Bible. You'll see over and over and over again that marriage is a picture of God's relationship with Israel. It's a covenant. It shows God's faithfulness, God's goodness. Now, because of this, because it's a picture of God's relationship with Israel, we see this second thing here, that marriage was the only place for sex. It's the only place. Nowhere else. Now, you may be able to go through, and in fact, you would be able to go through, and you can read some stories in the Old Testament where there are men going to visit prostitutes or things like that. And you'll see some of that. But the ideal that is constantly held up in Scripture, in the Old Testament for the people of Israel, is that of marriage being the only place for sex. You read in Genesis chapter 2, right? Adam and Eve, they come together, right? We hear, and it's for this reason. A man leaves his home and his family, and he clings to his wife. And they become, anybody remember that? One flesh. One flesh. That's an interesting term, isn't it? One flesh. Because if, say, you actually were to become one flesh with another person, say, Camille and I were actually one flesh when we said I do, then no matter how much the surgeon sliced and diced, a part of me would always be part of her, and a part of her would always be part of me. They could never separate us. That's how marriage was viewed, this one flesh idea. Now, these are two things you see throughout the Old Testament about the way Israel viewed marriage and about the way they viewed God when it came to marriage. There's also some practical stuff to it, right? Imagine you're trying to have this newly formed nation going and making a go of it. Imagine you're trying to figure out how we're all supposed to live, how we're all supposed to do this. Well, it would be really terrible, and there'd be a lot of disunity if everybody was sleeping with somebody else's spouse. No matter how progressive somebody might think they are, that tends to put a damper on things. People tend to get jealous about that sort of thing. It should come as no surprise then that this was the ethic, the sexual and marriage ethic that was present and in place when Jesus showed up thousands of years after God gave the 10 Commandments to the people of Israel. So Jesus shows up, and remember, this is kind of what everybody's thinking about adultery, and they know they've got these laws. They know it's a capital offense about adultery. But here comes this guy, Jesus, and Jesus is walking around the countryside, preaching and teaching and doing miracles, really messing with people's minds. Because on the one hand, he would say things they didn't really all the way agree with, and then he would do this miracle that could only have come from God, and they're saying, well, maybe this guy actually knows what he's talking about. Maybe this guy really is from God, and if he is, then maybe we should listen to him. But I've got this Bible thing over here, and the scroll says that this... And he talks a lot about grace and forgiveness. He talks a lot about loving your enemies. And so, the teachers of the law get together. We always love that part. The teachers of the law get together and they come up with a way to trap him. See, here's what happens. Jesus goes to the temple and he's teaching. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. Oh, we know what happens when that happens, right? Capital offense. Capital offense. Got to get rid of her. Got to exterminate her. Got to kill her. They made her stand before the group. So they bring this woman who was caught in adultery. Maybe she's fully dressed, maybe not. They ostensibly grabbed this woman in the act of adultery and brought her forward. Now remember, it was much more severe for women in ancient Israel when it came to adultery. Much more severe. So we don't know what happened to the guy. Maybe he just kind of slipped out of there as fast as he could. Maybe they're going to get him later. Who knows? But they bring this woman because they're coming to trap Jesus. They made her stand before the group and they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." Ooh, she's a bad one. She's the one we need to write off. She's the one, right? They get really judgmental, don't they? And if they're just going by the letter of the law, they kind of have a right to be. They say, this is terrible. We can't stand for this. So they go on, verse 5. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. That means kill her. Throw rocks at her till she dies and then throw her off a cliff to make sure she's dead. Now, what do you say? So, Jesus, I know you've been saying all of this stuff. But the law clearly says this. And you've been talking a lot about grace and forgiveness. So the law says this, you've been saying this, but we have this situation, clear-cut case. What do you think we should do? This is a trap. So what does Jesus do? What's the first thing he does? Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. I love that. You know, so often we get in these heated moments with people, or we get in these heated situations. Maybe the conversation gets real fast and loud, or maybe somebody starts making accusations and they want you to jump in there too, or maybe they're making accusations against you. And we're tempted to just respond back, to fire back with everything, all the ammo we have. But Jesus takes a beat. Jesus just takes a moment. He goes, and starts, who knows what he drew. I like to think it was like a picture of a mythical creature or something, you know. But whatever it was, he just starts writing down there and doing stuff. And they keep nagging him. They keep nagging at him. See, Jesus knows this is a trap. He knows what the deal is here. He knows that if he answers the wrong way, he's fallen for the trap. See, on the one hand, if he says, yeah, go ahead and stone her like the law says, well, then he's going against a lot of this forgiveness and love and teaching that he's been doing. On the other hand, if he says, nah, just let her go, then he risks looking like he's thumbing his nose at the law, as if he's totally disregarding the law, and Jesus doesn't want to do that either. He's never anti-law. So he bends down, starts to write on the ground with his finger, and they keep nagging him. Verse 7. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. So if you're keeping track, Jesus is teaching, people come up, they throw this probably not well-dressed lady right down in front of everybody and said, this lady has been doing this most heinous thing. It was a heinous crime in ancient Israel to commit adultery. Heinous. Because you had the potential to end a family line and them not know about it. Can you imagine? You have a child guys, imagine you have a child with your wife. You have no idea she's cheating on you. No idea. This kid comes out and you go, that guy looks a lot like Brian, but that's weird. And then you start having your suspicions, but you don't know. And it doesn't come out until years later. Years later, when you're past all the child rearing stages. Your family line has ended and nobody knew about it until just now. It was a heinous crime. And so they throw this lady right out here and they say, she has committed one of the most heinous acts possible. It's time for us to get rid of her. And Jesus draws down in the dirt, and they keep saying, hey, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And he gets up and he says, whichever one of y'all hadn't sinned, go ahead and start throwing the rocks, man. Goes back to drawing a unicorn or something. And what happens? People start leaving. They say, well, I know I've sinned. I know I've done stuff wrong. I'm not without sin. See, Jesus doesn't come right out and say it, and he may not even mean to imply it, but I'm pretty sure that those around probably inferred from his response that he was saying, hey, you know when you went over there and you kind of set this woman up when it came to adultery? You caught her in the act. That means you were watching. That means you didn't stop it when you could have. You're just as guilty as her. By the way, you got your own sins, your own things you've been doing. So that's what we do. Like with somebody who sins, we just kill them. He leaves them to their own minds. He leads them to the well and says, here, what do you think? And so they all start to leave. One by one, the oldest first, the wiser ones who've been around for a while and know the depths of their own sin. They start leaving. And they look around after a while, and the only people there are Jesus and this woman. That's when things get interesting. Jesus straightened up and asked her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? Now, Jesus knows they left. He saw them leave. He's not dumb. He's not blind either. He says, where are they? Did they not condemn you? She says, no one, sir. Then neither do I condemn you, Jesus declared. No one's condemning you? No. Then neither do I condemn you. I'm not here to rain on your parade. I'm not here to be angry at you. I'm not here to stone you. I'm not here to say you're done forever. Isn't that just like Jesus? The Jesus I know and I love and I serve, he knows all the things that I've ever done wrong. And he says, look, neither do I condemn you. I don't want anybody else condemning you, and neither do I condemn you. I'm here to offer grace. I'm here to reestablish things between you and the God of the universe. That's what Jesus is after. We like to stop here because it sounds good, it makes us feel good, and we live in a culture and in a time in our culture where we talk a lot about the grace of God and the forgiveness of God, and we should, and the love of God, and we should. But that's not the end of the story, and it's not the end of the sentence. Because what he says next means a lot for our discussion today. Go now and leave your life of sin. It's not just, hey, it's all good, go do whatever you want. It's go now and leave your life of sin. Be done with that whole thing. If you've ever wondered, what on earth am I doing here? Why do I exist at all? Let me clue you in. Here's why you exist. You exist to be basically an angled mirror in the cosmic universe. You are an angled mirror. You exist to reflect God's goodness and mercy and kindness and justice back to God and to all of creation. You are supposed to reflect who God is back to God and then out to all creation, kind of like an angled mirror would do. And in the moments when we aren't reflecting who God is back to God or to the people around us and the creation around us, that's when we are sinning because we're not doing what we were created to do. That's when we find ourselves in sin. Oh. So, when it comes to that, Jesus is saying to this woman, you aren't living the way you were created to live. You aren't reflecting who God is back to God or to the people around you. So now leave all that behind and start living in the way you were created to live. He's not giving her a get out of jail free card. He's releasing her to a new way to live. Friends, that's for each and every one of us. Each and every one of us. No matter what it is, we've been released to a new way of life. Jesus isn't giving us a get out of jail free card. You can go live however you want, do whatever you want, just whatever. No, he's calling you to something, a new way of life. See, my concern is that increasingly, I'm talking with Christians who view God's grace as a license to do whatever they want to do with whoever they want to do it with. That's not why Jesus came. Jesus didn't come so that you could finally get some rest at night. He didn't come to save you just from a fiery furnace somewhere. He came to call you to a new way of life, something better than you could ever have imagined. So when we talk about things like adultery, we need to be talking about the larger thing of sex, right? Sex was created for this one flesh relationship within the context of a committed marriage. That one flesh thing, that's what it's for. Nothing else. I've talked to some Christians, young and old, who are violating that. And they think, it's okay. God already forgives me. Let me tell you something. God loves you and God will forgive you. But why would you spit in his eye? Why would you spit in his eye when he's calling you to a better way of life, something better than you could imagine? Look, anything that undermines the covenantal relationship of marriage, right, which is mirroring God's covenant relationship with us. Anything that undermines that covenantal marriage relationship is sin. It's wrong. It's not something we should be doing because it doesn't reflect God's goodness back to God and to creation. This includes adultery, of course, but it also includes other things like premarital sex and pornography. Look, I've been in ministry for a long enough time, and I've seen the stats enough to know there's a lot of people involved in it who are sitting in church pews on Sundays. If that's you, let me beg you to please stop it. Please don't do that. You've been called out of that. You've been called to something better. You've been called away from it. Now you might say, hey, Josh, we just live in a different time, man. It's a different culture. It was much more conservative back then. No, it wasn't. Go read a history book, man. They were very progressive when it came to things like sex. They had entire religions based around it, entire religious rituals based around it. In fact, the first Christians were known for their what they called remarkable restraint when it came to their sexual ethic. They were known for this. They were known for getting up early and worshiping on Sunday morning. They were known for treating other people well, that they wouldn't defraud others. And they were known for remarkable sexual restraint. But somehow, 2,000 years later, there are people going around saying, it doesn't matter anymore. We're advanced. If it was true 2,000 years ago, it's true now. Because it was a picture of God's relationship with Israel, and then the first Christian said, no, it's also a picture of Jesus' love and faithfulness to us. They co-opted this Jewish thought, and they said, marriage for us is a picture of Jesus' love and commitment and faithfulness to us, his people. So anything that undermined that, they didn't want to do that. Friends, if you're caught up in something like adultery, extramarital sex, pornography, flirtatious stuff that you need to get away from, you're undermining that marriage covenant. You're undermining your commitment. See, I talk to people all the time, and they say, I just don't feel like I used to feel about him, or I don't feel like I used to feel about her. The butterflies are gone. We've been married for a few years, and that's great. Butterflies don't stick around. They fly off. You get married and you stay married because you're committed to the covenant of marriage. That's why you do it. Because you are mirroring God's relationship with his people. You're committed to that covenant. So even on the days when it's difficult and things are hard, you're still committed to that covenant. That's why we say, till death do us part, for richer or for poorer. That's what it comes down to. So if Israel saw it that way, if the first Christians saw it that way when it comes to God and marriage and sex and relationships, if they saw it that way, then I think we can too. So the bottom line of everything today that I want you to walk away with remembering is this. Your commitment to the marriage covenant is a mirror of your commitment to God. Remember that. The bad news is life can feel lonely sometimes, can't it? And it can feel really tempted. We can be really tempted to fall in all sorts of areas. And when we fall in those areas, it can be really tempting to try to isolate by ourselves and hope nobody else finds out about it. That's the bad news. The good news is you have people that will walk through life with you. People sitting in this room. You have a church family that you can lean on. You can rest with. You can be accountable to. So if you've found yourself wrapped up in something that is disrespecting the marriage covenant, I want to encourage you. Whether you're single or married, I want to encourage you. Be accountable to somebody. Start talking with somebody. Think this thing through. Nobody's here to jump down your throat. We're going to be like Jesus on this one, right? Neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more. Nobody's here to make you feel bad. Nobody's here to throw rocks at you, I hope. Nobody's here to do any of those things. But we do want to help you live this new life that Jesus brings, because it's the best thing that could ever happen to you. I want to encourage you to be accountable and vulnerable with somebody, whether that's a close friend, another follower of Jesus you trust, or even your spouse. It's so important. Would you let me pray for you for just a second? Let's bow our head and close our eyes all together, just for a moment to reflect. God, I confess that I am not perfect. We all know that we have sinned and fallen short of your glory and your grace. So this morning, we just surrender every part of our life, including our sexuality, including our behaviors accompanied with it. We surrender it to you. I pray for all my brothers and sisters who are struggling with any of these issues that might undermine the marriage covenant. God, help them to get out of it. Help them to find somebody and talk with them and be vulnerable and be accountable so that they can start living the life that you gave us to live. The thing that's better than we can imagine even in this moment. Lord, help us to remember that our job is to reflect your glory and your goodness and your kindness and your mercy in this world. Amen. You know, one of the good things about being in a church family is you can look around on a Sunday or a Wednesday or whenever and you can go, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this thing. And one of the ways we remind ourselves of that is we do this thing that we call communion. So deacons, would you go ahead and go to your spots? We've got some of our deacons, that word just means servants. They're going to serve communion this morning. What I'd like you to do in a minute when I release you is to come get these elements. And the reason we do this communion thing is it reminds us that we're all in this together. And so whatever you might be struggling with, maybe I called out something this morning that you're struggling with. Maybe I didn't. We're all in this together. And just the same way a family sits around and takes a meal together at Thanksgiving, we're going to take this little miniature meal together today. This is open to anybody. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, feel free to come and take it with us. So as you come, if you would approach the table from the left side and then leave the table from the right side. The band's going to play some music while you're doing that. Don't take the elements just yet. We'll all do that together as one family this morning in a moment, okay? You can go ahead and go get the elements.